Let me organize my thoughts around three themes. Actually, the birth, life, and death of Jesus Christ. I want to organize my thoughts around those three, and I want to reflect upon justice through those three lenses, if you will. The point of my talk is how to do justice well. So the movement is moved. There's stuff happening in the greater public space that we never would have dreamed of. People asking questions, people jumping in, and there's a whole lot of action out there now. How do we ground it? How do we, as Biola students, faculty, join others, particularly the Christian university, the universities that are serious about following Jesus? There's an incredibly important role in shaping and guiding this movement. And that's why I'm going after these three themes, because I think we have to go deeper. I know we have to go deeper on this movement of justice. Else, I would suggest it will fizzle and fade. Is it a fad? I think in part it is. I'm not too ashamed to say that. I love it, because everybody's talking about it. But it's people like yourselves, as you arm lock with others, that can take this movement deeper and take it into not just decades, but centuries, and can really change the world. And Joshua, your generation will be part of that, which is an incredible thing. So the three themes: birth, life, and death of Jesus. First, birth, the incarnation. You may know this word very well. Some of you newcomers to that word, you may be intimidated by it. Just simply means when Jesus was born and he left heaven, the kenosis, and shed or undressed himself, as one poet says, and came and fleshed himself. One theologian, I think it's Barth, but don't quote me on that, said the incarnation is the greatest sacrament. Others define sacrament as a visible expression of invisible grace. And so if that's the case, a visible flesh expression of invisible grace of God, the incarnation then is it. Jesus Christ, God in the flesh. But are we not the ongoing incarnation? Did the incarnation end? Did it end with Jesus' death? Well, we're sometimes shy as followers of Jesus to think this way. But we are the ongoing incarnation. So when the Bible says, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me, everything I have is yours and everything you have is mine. When it talks about, or when poets say, Christ has no body on earth anymore, think Sister of Avila, Catholic, years ago, yours are the hands and the feet of Christ. Or even in the first century, when followers of Jesus, followers of the way, it was called then, started to call themselves little Christs, right? It's a little bit daunting to think about, oh my, the Spirit of Christ flows through my body and my soul and my veins. We are the ongoing incarnation. Here's, you can tell I love poetry. The just woman justices in 10,000 places. Christ is lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his. Christ in the features of our faces. A friend of mine, Sonia Frischnet from Germany, years ago, Belinda and I, my wife and I, lived on a floating hospital in West Africa. And part of the mandate of mercy ships, the Anastasis, where we lived, was to serve the poorest of the poor. These are the folks at the bottom. Beautiful people, beautiful friends. And it would go into a port, we would be there for 6 months or a year, and really basic, just do radio ads for people who are sick with certain diseases. And often in those contexts, in this case it was in Benin, West Africa, in those cases people are hidden away and tucked away with significant maladies. Even a child with a cleft lip or a palate, and still in a country like Benin is considered demonic, and if that little child comes out of their home, the villagers actually might kill the child or bury the child alive, still to this day. So there's a lot of superstition about significant maladies or illnesses. Sonia Frischnet was a nurse, still is, with the medical folks on board this hospital ship, and she was out in the streets of Berlin when they convened what was called a medical screenings. All the people that heard through the radio that they were meant to come and perhaps be helped from cleft lip and palate, strabismus, glaucoma, tumors, facial tumors. They would come out on that specific day and they would be screened by a doctor. Sonia met a woman named Fatima. Fatima, a Muslim, beautiful Muslim woman. She had a blue scarf wrapped around her. All you could see was her eyes. Sonia walked up to her, placed her arm around her and said, tell me your problem. Tell me who you are first, of course. What is your name? Tell me what you're struggling with. And Fatima unveiled her scarf and revealed a 3-pound tumor coming from her ear, coming right down the front of her, along her shoulder. And it was called keloids, and basically what had happened is she had her ear pierced, and it got so infected that the cells started to multiply, almost like a cancer. And keloids is a very serious thing, but it's remediable here in many places in the world, but if you let it get too big, it can actually take her life. And it was so big that it eventually would have taken her life. And so Sonia continued to talk with her, make eye contact with her, continued to touch her as she told her story about how she came down with keloids and how she had to hide herself from all people except for her mother, because she was so disfigured. So Sonia says, let's go see Dr. Gary Parker. Dr. Gary Parker is a maxillofacial surgeon from actually the great state of California, and he left all of that and went abroad and has lived in Africa since, and he's known as one of the top in the world. Dr. Gary Parker looks at Fatima and says, oh, I know what this is, Fatima. We can remove your tumor. Would you like that? Yes, of course. 2 months later, she comes to the operating theater on board this floating hospital ship, and her tumor is removed, and she's then brought into the ward of the hospital on the ship, and Sonia continues to befriend her. And she begins to tell her the story of Jesus. Beautiful story I'm sharing with you from Sonia. Comes back after some visits, and basically she's healed, and she finally gets up the courage to sit down and tell Sonia about her experience. She's telling Sonia, I am now wanting to follow Isa, Jesus, because you told me his story. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am that you healed me with your hands. Incarnation, huh? Surgeon scalpel. And she says, but I need to tell you, this is all through translation, I need to tell you what was the most important thing, the thing that made me weep, the thing that made me want to follow Jesus. This is why I chose to follow the God that you talk about. In the end, it wasn't because the tumor is removed, although I'm so grateful. In the end, I'm so grateful for all the words and all the people who I've met here. But the reason why I am choosing to follow your God is because you touched me. Oh, wow, Sonia said that's so great. I'm glad you were blessed by my touch. No, you don't understand. You don't understand. I haven't been touched by a human being for 12 years. 12 years. No one has ever laid a hand on me. It's not Sonia, the ongoing incarnation of Christ, that she laid her hands, the hands of Christ, on a woman. And that woman's heart radically changed, so much so she wanted to know the Isa, her word for Jesus. We are the ongoing incarnation. We were with some friends from our office, actually local partners here from Solidarity. Bethany. Is Bethany here today? She is. Okay, I hope I tell your story well. But just in passing, we were talking about the greater Fullerton area. A lot of Hispanics there who Bethany and her colleagues work with. And there's a lot of issues in the complicated issues about immigration in our country. But there are a couple churches in the greater Fullerton area that had sort of stood out this issue and said, I don't know if we can touch this. It's a bit controversial. Well, in the end, through Bethany's work and others, they decided to jump into the mess, recognizing this is going to be difficult. Some people are going to raise big questions we're not sure we're getting into, but they jumped in. They jumped in and fleshed themselves in a very complicated issue. So much so that when those churches jumped in, the people that Bethany worked with, Hispanic families, came to Bethany and said this, of followers of Jesus: Bethany, we didn't think they cared about us. We didn't think they cared about us. And Bethany, just a little rim of water in her eyes, told me this. She said, you know what, Stephen, Glenn? There, at that point, I could share the full gospel with those families because those churches and fleshed themselves. They stepped into a controversial issue. Beautiful story, right here in Fullerton. Bethany, thank you. And if you need to correct that, I knew that. Compassion is never illegal, by the way. We didn't think they cared. Quote, the God of curved space is not going to help us, but the Son whose blood spattered the hem of his mother's robe, that's the God who's going to help us. Incarnation, flesh. What does this mean for us? When we talk about justice, we first want to rise to, what can I do? The number one question I get is, what can I do? But Jesus didn't just do justice, he became justice. He incarnated himself. He calls us to become justice. And out of that becoming, we do. So, friends, it's a long journey. Obedience in the same direction. It gets messy. It can be technical. You know, we were driving yesterday, and part of our drive was right along the coastline, and we put in some music. We played two musicians. One was Josh Garrels. Josh Garrels, do you know him? Anybody know Josh Garrels? Okay, Josh Garrels is giving away all his albums right now for 2 weeks. And all donations as a result of those free albums, they call them tips, they're going to the country of Congo to the work that we're doing there. So if you love Garrels, go on noisetrade.com. So we're listening to Garrels. We love Josh Garrels because we spent a couple days with him. And he's the real deal. And then we listened to Recomposed by Max Richter, basically Vivaldi's Four Seasons redone. Amazing if you like orchestral music. But as we're doing this, you're looking at these vistas and we're listening to the music. It felt like we were in a movie, honestly. Doing justice and becoming justice is unfortunately not like that. Maybe there's once in a while when it feels like it feels good. But most of it is heavy lifting, and you're in the midst, right, Bethany? Right, Glenn? Questions and problems, and maybe sometimes people aren't grateful, and maybe they don't like what you're doing, and other times, but there are those moments like the moment I described that Bethany experienced where you feel like the music is playing and this is all worth it. But even Billy Graham said, ministry is 90% hard work and 10% what I thought it would be. Same is true with justice. So you've got to immerse yourself. It's messy, it's technical. If you're working in issues in the United States here with families, immigrants, refugees, if you're working abroad in economic development, if you're working in the health arena, boy, health practitioners, by the way, understand incarnation because their hands are in the midst of it, in the midst of sorrow. So the incarnation is a theme that I think we as leaders and shapers of a movement, if we can get a hold of that, and we can link it together with spiritual direction and formation and education like you are doing here, which is so great, you will play a role in shaping something that won't fizzle or fade. Secondly, the life of Jesus. I want to organize my thoughts around his life insofar as he spent time, Jesus, radical time, at tables. So yes, there's the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper, or the communion table, depending on your tradition. But there's also Jesus constantly sitting around the table and having meals with unlikely people. Table fellowship. Why is that such a big deal? Why was it so revolutionary in its day? Here, let me just read a few things that'll give you the context. In first century Palestine, Judaism the class system of Judaism was enforced sort of rigorously during the day. It was legally forbidden to mingle with sinners who were outside the law. Table fellowship with beggars, tax collectors, and prostitutes was a religious, social, and cultural taboo. So when Jesus pulled up a chair alongside a tax collector and across the table from a prostitute, he was saying something radically profound. You're accepted by God. Listen to this. In the Near East, to share a meal with someone is a guarantee of peace, trust, fraternity, and forgiveness. The shared table symbolizes a shared life. For an Orthodox Jew to say today, I would like to have dinner with you, is a metaphor for saying, I would like to enter into friendship with you. Even today, an American Jew will share a donut and a cup of coffee with you, but to extend a dinner invitation is to say, come to my mikdash, the miniature sanctuary of my dining room table, where we will celebrate the most sacred and beautiful experience that life affords, friendship. So when Jesus pulled up a chair, when Jesus convened the Last Supper with his disciples, and he said things like, I no longer call you servants, you're friends. He was saying something radical. He was saying you're accepted by God. God wants to be friends with you. And when we, in our actions, in our words, in our programs, when we reformat everything around friendship, everything changes. Because there's no longer patron and client. Charity, which is the benefactor and the beneficiary. It's, wait, you're my friend, and I have something that I must learn from you. And you have something you must give as I do my best to give to you. It's radical and it's different. Even in the first century, you can go back and look. Tertullian writes, others, there were two classes of people. There were the Greeks, and then there were the Jews. Okay? When the Christians started meeting in the first century, it was like a wealthy person, poor person, Greek, Jew, woman, male. Okay, that whole thing that Paul talks about. And it freaked the culture out. In fact, they said, Christians have a hatred for the human race, so we refer to them as reprobate. Why? Because they didn't honor the class system. And they became known, interestingly enough, they became known as the third race. First race was Greeks, most important, the best, the top. Greeks and Romans. Second class was Jews, and then this third thing, the third race. Would there be something that we can learn there? Table fellowship, communion, the Lord's table is a motif. It's a mandate for friendship. And just before we think that, well, you're trying to equate the Eucharist and Holy Communion, isn't that about our relationship with God? Isn't that about church? Well, when you look through the Gospels and you got three, the synoptics, that talk about Holy Communion in a very liturgical sense, although the context is this is disciples sitting around a table and having a meal together. And in that beautiful context of friendship, he lifts the cup. He lifts the bread, right? Well, in the fourth gospel, John, he actually, in the context of the Last Supper, right? You know, in John 13 to John 17-ish, that is what's happening. He doesn't talk about the words, do this in memory of me, but he actually talks about what happens. So he's got Jesus, Son of God, picks up the basin and the towel and leans down and washes the feet. So communion and table fellowship and the Eucharist is as much about what we do on Sundays when we lift the bread and the cup as when we serve one another. There's a message there. And in fact, when John wrote his gospel, it was already controversial. Sacramental theology has been controversial for a long time. It was already controversial then, so he was writing to say, guys, friends, don't forget about the whole point of Holy Communion. It's about love and friendship and lifting up the body of Christ. When we must become friends with those who suffer, because you never give up on those who are your friends. I would never give up on Joshua. What if Joshua takes a path in life? You won't. What if he takes a path in life that's way out in left field? What if he becomes a prodigal? I will die for him, right? He's my son. What if we approached our friends who suffer in this city and around the world the same way? Would we give up? What are the implications there? Here's one. Don't take a second tunic. You know that text? When Jesus says, go out 2 by 2 and don't take extra money, don't take an extra shirt. Well, I take an extra shirt when I travel. What is he saying? The reason why he said that is because when they went into communities, they were dependent upon those that hosted them to clean their shirt. Right? Very practical. Why is that important? Because in friendship, your friend must give and take, and we must give and take. Find ways to receive. When you go to Fullerton and work with Bethany or Glenn, when you go across the world, I always do this now. I ask for everyone I meet, in the dustiest of roads, in the smallest of homes, would you pray for me? Because I need the grace of God. Kyrie eleison. Lord, have mercy, that part of the Mass, if you love liturgy. Why is that there? Because everyone, rich, famous, poor, must go before God and say, Lord, have mercy. And when we do that with one single word, with one single piece of liturgy, we're saying to those people that want to treat me as God, because I'm a CEO of a big organization, who cares before the throne of God? Kyrie eleison. I need the mercy of God. When we ask them to pray for us, we are lifting their dignity and say, you are the body of Christ, help me. So the incarnation, becoming justice, not just doing, the Holy Communion table or the table of fellowship, becoming friends with those who suffer. And thirdly and lastly, the crucifixion, the death of Jesus. Justice alone will not change the world. Justice is sine qua non, it's essential, it's non-negotiable, but it will not change the world. Some of you know South African history well, much better than I do. But I encountered it off and on over the years because Nelson Mandela has been somebody I've just studied as a leader. And in fact, I think he's one of the leaders of our ages. And in that study, I came across Desmond Tutu and his influence on Mandela, particularly his theology of Ubuntu that later Mandela picked up as the politics of Ubuntu. Great, you can line those two up. It's a beautiful thing. Well, there was a moment in South Africa when apartheid was beginning to dismantle. And friends, if you know the history there, that should have turned into bloodshed, but it didn't. Really, because of Mandela and Tutu and a few others. Well, more than a few. But there was a moment when Tutu was in a crowd, an angry mob. And there was a white man there, and there was a black crowd, and they had lifted the rocks, and they were going to stone the white man. Why? Because the white man had done the wrong thing. Apartheid was unjust. They were going to take justice, exercise justice. Desmond Tutu gets down on his knees and moves his body and lays his body across the white man who was now on the ground, preparing to be stoned. He lays himself across his body. He says nothing. But in his action, in that single act, he says, look, if you stone him, you stone me, and you kill the hope for our nation. Joshua and I were talking about Lord of the Rings yesterday, one of our favorite films. And there's a moment in the film, the second film, when Frodo and Sam, they get halfway to Mordor. And Mordor, right? Joshua, tell me how to say it like Aragorn. Morto. And so Sam says to Frodo, Frodo, we don't have enough food. We've run out of food. We only have food for the journey back. And Frodo says, Sam, we're not going back. We can eat that food. We're not going back. So when we talk about justice and we talk about the things that we're pursuing, there's a point when you can, beyond consumerism is we're not going back. We're going to get into this. We're going to incarnate ourselves. We're going to become friends with these people. We're not going to turn around and go back. It becomes costly. It becomes sacrificial. It becomes like Desmond Tutu laying your body across. He was like, I'm not going, I'll die with this if I need to. It's a distinct lacking thing in our movement. Well, years ago, the missionaries used to go out to Africa with their coffins, right? Okay, friends, I'm with you. I'm not prepared to do that. But where's my level of sacrifice? And what drives that sacrifice? Is it justice? No, I would suggest it's love, the sacrificial love of Jesus Christ. If I have a faith that can move mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, give over my body to hardship, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Listen to this quote. You'll be shocked by who said it. I know men, and Jesus Christ is no mere man. Sorry about the gender here. This is an old quote. Talking about men. But he's meaning all people, all of us. I know men, and Jesus Christ is no mere man. Between him and every other person of history, there are no possible terms of comparison. Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I have founded great empires. But on what did the creation of our genius rest upon? Upon force? No. Jesus founded his empire on love. And at this hour, millions of men, let me add women, children, would die for him. You know that? You know who wrote that? Or said that? Napoleon Bonaparte. I had a professor at Wheaton College where I did a grad degree. Scott Moreau, you may know him. He's a writer, author. He came to class one day and I talk a lot, and I think about what will people really remember? And I think about Scott Moreau, and I don't remember much of what he said in all those classes, but I remembered this. He said, friends, he stood up, he said, we're going to talk about contextualization of theology, contextualization of mission, which was his course. We're going to get into this, and this, but before I do, I got to tell you something. I was praying, and I felt like God said, Scott, I will not judge you by what you know. I will judge you by how you love. And he had tears in his eyes. Scott Moreau. Justice is our measure. We must measure ourselves with justice. If we are all about worship services, if we're all about serving one another, but we do not reach out in great sacrificial love, then we have failed. Faith without deeds is dead. That's why you're here. You're already converted. Otherwise, I'd be converting you to that message. So justice is our measure. It's a proof of whether we do love greatly, but love is our great motive. Justice is our measure. Love is our motive. Reinhard Niebuhr. Of all the commandments, which one is the most important? You know this. Love the Lord your God. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is why Jean Valjean can sing at the end of Les Miserables. You know it. Remember that final song if you saw the film? To love another person is to see the face of God. No greater love than she or he who lays down her life for a friend. What are the implications? Radical availability. Are we really willing to lay it down? Am I willing to lay down my life for this? How many times do I come down on my face and say, God, I give you all, before I rise up with my hands and I do 1,000 things, which is what I do. I'm a practitioner. I'm an activist. But have I sacrificed? Have I given all? Am I willing to? Have I stood up enough on significant issues, like our brothers and sisters who are suffering in the United States with the immigration issues? Whoa, controversial. Have I jumped in, not even knowing exactly, maybe you don't even know exactly, I don't know all the issues there, but I'm going to jump in and figure it out along the way. Bethany's colleague, Tommy, said, he goes to churches and says, you're interested in discipling your people in your church. He says, let's talk about immigration. Let's bring immigration into this church. That will disciple them. They will very quickly start asking questions they've never asked before. We tend to think of discipleship in a vacuum. Hands-on, incarnational, real people. Men, have we stood up tall enough and strong enough for women? Half the sky. 80% of those who are poor, 75% of the refugees are women. 66% of the work that's done worldwide, just work, is done by women. And women only own 10% of the world's property and 1% of the world's income. Women have suffered silently for so many years. Have I taken a radical enough stand on this issue? I don't have all the answers. I'm not giving you the answers. I'm saying, are we willing to jump in and say, Jesus, I'll walk with you? Last story, and then I'm going to ask David to lead us in some Q&A, some questions if there's time. Back to Congo, there's a woman in Congo named Madame Odili. Madame Odili is a Congolese woman, and she's got a smile that goes from ear to ear. And you wouldn't know she even lives in a context of suffering because she's so joyful. Madame Odili was asked by pastors from 10 churches who came together and forgave one another because they had been divided because of their ethnicity, because of the conflicts that plague that nation, poorest country in the world. More people have died in Congo than any other country or war since World War II. It's the rape capital of the world. 9 out of 10 women, count 10 women, 9 of them have been raped in the Congo. It is a travesty. These 10 churches says, we're going to do something about it. We have nothing. We don't know what to do. We don't have resources. We're going to do something about this. They put together a small group of women led by Madame Odile, who, when women are raped in the forest, Madame Odile is the one who embraces the victim, touches them, says, we're going to walk this together. We're going to go to the clinic. We're going to talk to the village. We're going to talk to your family so your husband doesn't reject you. In that culture, husbands often reject victims of rape. There's a stigma there. We're going to help take care of your kids while you walk through this, and we're going to find a way for you to earn money and income so you don't have to go to the forest to gather firewood, because firewood is something that can be sold, not only cook your own food. We're going to find other ways, microfinance, which World Belief does in Congo, and others. Madame Odile is Jesus with skin on. Did you know Jesus has black skin and looks like a wonderful, beautiful African woman? Because Jesus is incarnated in the toughest place in the world. I remember thinking about this one day, and you ask the questions, how can this be? How come so many people can suffer? How so many women, so many people die? Jesus, God, where are you? And I felt, what if God were to say this back to me? Stephen, I'm in the bush in the Congo, and I'm wrapping my arms around Madame Odile and those little girls that have been raped. Where are you, Stephen? Why don't you come and join me? Stephen, I am in the greater Fullerton area, not perhaps in the places you think, but in the corners, in the suffering places. I'm here and I'm weeping, and I've got my arm linked with dads who are trying to provide for their family. Why don't you come over there and join me? That's perhaps his call to us. And my call to you is, dare we disturb the universe? Yes, we are. But it's going to take a far smaller group of people who are willing to go and sacrifice greatly, incarnating themselves, becoming friends, immersed in the relationships of life. And out of a motive of great sacrificial love, it's those people that will shape this movement and keep it from frizzling out into a fad. That's my invitation to you And it's an invitation that I give to myself every day. Thank you.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.